Wow, we have to move. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Nun Aleph. We are continuing to learn the sugya regarding minhagim that need to be upheld, minhagim that need to be overturned. We're going to learn when are the times, when do we say Devarim Hamutarim Va'achedim Lahagu Behem Isur I'ater Shoy Lahatinam B'fneiam. You're not allowed to publicly nullify a minig. When do we say that you are allowed to publicly nullify a minig? The difference we're going to learn in Tosfos between a learned community and between a non-learned community. We're going to come back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah speaks about a traveler. The difference between traveling to a location and planning to return versus someone who traveled to a new location and plans to settle there. The Gemara on Daf Nun Aleph Amud Beis is going to resolve the contradiction that we have in the Mishnah. The Mishnah gives two criteriums that sometimes could contradict each other. On one hand, the Mishnah says that if you go from one location to another location, you always have to follow the Chumrah. And then the Mishnah says, Va'al yishana adam b'fnei ha'machloikes, which l'chayra should mean you have to keep the local custom, not to create a machloikes. How can one reconcile that? We're going to have a very important machloikes Rashi Tosfos regarding a person that goes from a location where one day Yom Tov is celebrated in Eretz Yisrael, in the locations where the shluchim of the Beis Din reached before the middle of the month, and the person travels to a new location where their 2 days of Yom Tov is celebrated, and the person is planning to return. Whether you can do malacha bitzina or not even bitzina, again, that will be a machlokes rishonim that we'll have on the top of Daf Nun Beis, and a lot more. Chavra, let us start where we left off. That's Daf Nun Amud Beis at the end of the Amud, 2 lines before the end of the Amud by the 2 dots. Okay, just behemshech to the Bnei Baisham, who were told, like we learned yesterday, that even though it was not a minute that they undertook of not making a trip that by the letter of the law may be made, even on Erev Shabbos, even though they're going into a ship, because it's a very quick trip, and even though that the location to where they wanted to travel was the place where that Friday was the only market day. So it was a substantial loss to have to adhere to the minig of their forefathers. Nevertheless, they were told, the pasuk Shma b'nei Musar Avicha, that they are obligated to uphold the minig of the forefathers. And by the way, there is a difference regarding someone who undertakes a minig for oneself. If I take a chumrah for me, my children are not bound to it. But when a family undertakes a minig for the family, or when a community undertakes a minig for the community, that's different. That is the story that we learned. That goes down. And now we're going to have min hakotza el hakotza, an opposite scenario. That let's start again. Daf Nun Amud Beis by the 2 dots. B'nei choizoi. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu malachenu b'shahar kol yom. Says the Gemara, B'nei choizoi, people that lived in the city of Chozoi. Lohadi, they had a minig, the mafresh echala ma'aroiza. Rashi says aroiza is oiris. So even though the obligation of separating chalas only from the 5 grains, they undertook a chumrah. And this went on for a while. And the last line of the Amud, Asav Amru, Leila Rabbi Yosef, they once came in front of Rabbi Yosef, and Rabbi Yosef heard about this minig. So Amar Lahu, he tells the B'nei Choizoi, Nichla Zor Ba'apayu. Let a non-kohen take that which you separated as challah, and we know that challah is mamish like truma, and let a non-kohen eat it. In other words, do an act in public that makes it clear that this minig is a non-minig. Challah of rice is not challah. Anyone can eat it. Wow. Says the Gemara, Esvei Abaya to Rav Yosef, it says in a brayso, that dvarim hamutarim, that's the whole meaning of a minig. We never go, God forbid, against the Torah. A minig means that something that prior to the minig could have been done one way or the other way, whichever way was permissible, and then people undertook upon themselves a certain chumrah, a certain behavior, whether it is in Surmid or Asay Toiv. So Devarim Hamutarim, and Va'achedim Nohagu Bohem Isir, Daf Nun Aleph, look at what it says in the Brayso, I'ater Shoy Lahatinam B'fneim. Do not publicly nullify that minig. How can you tell them to eat whatever they considered challah, that it should be given to a non-kohen in front of them? So Amar Loi, to which Rabbi Yosef responds to Abaya, oh, you're quoting the Braisa. But Valav, me, Itmar Allah, did we not learn on the Braisa that Amar Rab Chizda really limits the Braisa? That Braisa, that one may not publicly nullify a minig in front of those who undertook the minig, that's only bikutai. Now the kutim at a latter point were already considered not to be Yidden altogether. But at this time, where Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef is having this conversation, or at least when Rab Chizda made that statement clarifying the Braisa, the kutim were still considered Yidden, even though they converted for ulterior motives. But we're going according to the Mando Ahmed, it's still a proper conversion. They were already very lax in their observance of the mitzvahs. So Rab Chizda explains that when you have a community of people like the kutim, that are b'chlal not at all careful, they're not nedagdikim when they keep the mitzvahs. And there's one thing that they're keeping, even if that one thing is a minik, even if that one thing is really not by the letter of the law, don't nullify that in front of them, because then it's the end. Because then they're going to see, the few things that we were keeping that doesn't have to be kept, they're going to become very lax in the mitzvahs altogether. Masha Enkin, in other words, his counter was that Rabbi Yosef had the right to be Mavatal the minig because Bnei Chuzoi are not like the Kutayim. And Abaye disagreed with that. So the last word in the second line is Abaye's counter to Rabbi Yosef. Hold on. Okay, I accept Rabbi Chizda. Kutayim might tamam. Why is it that in front of Kutayim you may not nullify their minig in public? Mishum de Mesarchi Milsa, because they will come to get confused. They won't understand. Well, the minig doesn't have to be kept, but they didn't have to be. They don't know that. If this doesn't have to be kept, that doesn't have to be kept, and they'll become, God forbid, overly lax, even worse than before. Hana Inchi challenges Abaye to Rabbi Yosef, the Bnei Chuzoi, these people, Nami Sarchim Ilsa. Like Rashi writes in the second line from the top of the Amid, that this is Kushi, this is part of Abaye's rebuttal. If you're going to be leading it regarding the challah they take from the rice, we're speaking about them, they're not going to be so careful about taking off challah, or if they will take off challah, then a non-kohen will eat challah from the grain. So Ella Amar Ravashi says like this, Chazina, this is what we have to look at. If that community, majority of the bread that they bake comes from rice, they have the roiv oiris, and they have a little bit of grain, but that's not their main staple food, then indeed, loy nichlo zarba payu. Then don't be mavatal this minik in front of them. Why? Because dilma mishtakcha toidas chalaminayu. Because now we understand why they made the minik. They hardly ate grain. So when they were making their doughs from rice, they were never separating challah, because you don't have to separate challah from rice. But then some people were afraid that if our children will grow up, that every time you bake bread, you never separate challah, then they're going to forget b'challah the whole mitzvah of challah. Now, that is a valid reason to make such a minig, and that minig should not be nullified. However, but if indeed roiv vat'ir is dagan, and they are separating challah from dagan, and then on top of that, they were machmir that they're separating challah from rice, everything is a balance. In this case, indeed, Ravashi is agreeing to what Rabbi Yosef says in such a scenario, nichlo zarba payu, be mevatel the minig, make sure non-kahanim eat, non-kahanim that they respect, eat that which they consider challah. Why? Because then this minig can bring about a terrible thing. Now, I want you to know, even if the roiv eat rice, this fear always exists, but it's a balance. You have to pick and choose. Where is there more upside, or is there more downside? And this is the downside over here. A double negative. If they will be making two doughs, one out of grain and one out of rice. Now, when I have two doughs in front of me, wheat, barley of the same quality, as long as it is min hamukaf, as long as it's all together, I can separate from one dough challah for the other. I can separate from one dough challah from it and for the other, or from one only for the other. So here the fear is that you're going to be separating challah from one dough only for the other. So if you have in front of you grain, and you're taking a piece of that grain, and that's going to be challah for the rice doesn't have to be tithed, which means the challah that you separated is not challah. What is it? it's dough pre-chalad. That's tevel. So the kohen, thinking he's getting challah, and he's getting it menachiv, he's getting a piece of wheat dough, of barley dough, bona fide tevel, God forbid. Or vice versa. If they're going to have, again, the two doughs, one of rice and one of the grains, and they're going to be separating from one only for the other when it's min hamukov, but because they think you have to be mafresh from everything, because they're being mafresh challah from rice. So again, they're going to be taking off challah from the rice for the grain. They will think that the grain is already post challah. It can be eaten by anyone. But the emes is that which remained is tevel, because the rice is garnished. So because of that chashash, and by the way, this chashash also exists if ruban oires achli. But on the other hand, we are afraid that dilma mishtakha toiras chalaminayu. So you have to weigh, is it more advantageous to upkeep the minhag, or is it detrimental to upkeep the minhag? And that should determine whether you should be mavatal the minhag or not. It's very important. Now, I'm going to get a little bit ahead of myself in the Tosfos. Let's go. Keep your finger in the gufa. That's 9 lines. We're up to 9 lines from the top of the Amid. Inside the top Tosfos, go 12 lines down into the Tosfos. Another very important knetch to determine regarding minhagim. Should they be upheld or should they be overturned? Says Tosfos v'im toimer. The mashma, the dafka b'bnei hamedina, the Tosfos is going on the words that the Gemara is going to quote again, the words of the Baraisa, that if you meet a group of people that something which is permissible, they undertook it upon themselves to be asur, a minhag, don't nullify it in front of them. So says Tosfos mashma, the dafka b'bnei hamedina, oy b'kutoy ein rishoy lahativ, as we just quoted Rabbi Chizda, avol, that b'fnei chachamim, in front of Chachamim, or if you're just not keeping it, you're nullifying it, Shulay b'fneim it's mutter. So the Tosfos says, I don't understand. How did we begin this Pedic? The Mishnah says that if you go from one place to another place, which means that you are bound by the minhag. If it's Shulay b'fneim, why b'chlal are you bound to minhagim? Okay, I get it that you can't be mavatal a minhag in front of them, and that's only if they're kutayim. So why are you b'chlal bound by minhagim? It's gavaldik. No, we're having a whole topic whether you can nullify it or not, which l'chayre implies you're not bound by it. So v'oimeri, we're reading in Tosfos. This is so important. The masnisin ayre b'minig chashuv shehenigu alpi talmidei chachamim. You have to know, where did the minhag come from? That's the key over here. Was it made by a tzaddik? Was it made by talmidei chachamim? Or did the minhag come from the amcha, from the people? That's gavaldik. The hachemayru shenoagu b'nei medina ma'atzman. We can stop over here. Just that, there's so many other nuances, but this is beautiful. It's a minhag that comes from a Talmud Chacham may never be nullified. Not only that, if you come to a place where people are noyeg to follow that minhag, you're bound by it. If you go into a community where Baruch Hashem, everyone is learning Chitas Tanambam, you have to keep it. Nervous then, if there is other minhag which are beautiful, but they come from the people, here you have to see maybe more bad will come from the minhag than good, like we're weighing over here. And even here, not to be mezalzelet b'fneihem, because if they're not learned, then you're going to be mezalzelet in front of them if there won't be a michshel. If there won't be a michshel, that in itself is not a good thing. Then there's another detail, we quoted it yesterday in the intro, that Slach explains. When it comes to being mavatal a minhag, sometimes you have to be matin neder. Sometimes you have to be, so there's really 3 madregas. There are times that you should not be mavatal the minhag. Don't make a hataras nadarim. And that is in a place where Ruben oir is achli. And because of the fear, dilma mishtak chatoiras chalaminayu, even if the minhag came from the amcha, you have to uphold it. Then you have minhagim that there is no downside if you don't keep it. There's no upside. If you want, you can be mavatal it if it came from the people, but you have to be matin neder, you have to have a beis din and do ataras nadarim. And then if there is a minhag, not that it came from Talmidei Chachamim, and it's detrimental, which is the last case, that following the minhag could mean that sometimes someone is going to eat tevel, here says that Slach, not only should you nullify it, don't even be matin neder. Or it's a bad minhag. Gewaldig. Okay, weiter. Gufa we learned above, quoting the Baraisa. Dvarim hamutarim If there are things that al-pidin are mutter, and v'achedim lahagomim isir, and other people took upon themselves, the people took upon themselves the isir, still be careful. Don't be matted in front of them. Don't nullify. Don't make it away in front of them. This is the Rab Chizda. You know, when we say that, that's only if the people are kutayim askinon, which means that they're, to begin with, they're not keeping the mitzvah so good. And if they're going to see someone who they respect being mevatel their minig, it's going to make them lax in the ikaradin. In other words, but if you are in front of people that are scholarly, that are learned, that are, more importantly, that are God-fearing, what they keep, they understand this is a minig. We should understand not everyone has to keep my minig. It's not going to weaken my commitment if you're not keeping it. So again, with the Tosfos, if it's a minig that didn't come from Talmidei Chachamim, because a minig, again, that comes, if the minig originated from important people, and this is the minig of our community, when you come to our community, you have to keep it. But if it came from us, then you don't have to keep it, and you can even nullify it in front of us. We're not going to be in a spall from you. Now, in other words, you're telling me that there's no prohibition of nullifying it if it's not in front of Kutayim. No, V'hatanya, here again, we're going to be showing how it is important to keep the local minig regardless. And we're going to go through three interesting minhagim, three dinim. Let's go. Two brothers are allowed to bathe together. We're speaking about times where people bathe completely unclothed. And as she writes on top of the Amid, 8 lines from the top of the Amid, that why would you think two brothers may not go to the bathhouse together? The ein kan mishum pritzus, the nema mitoich shemitzuyin yachad. Brothers, to begin with, are familiar with each other, and now they're going to see each other unclothed. Maybe they're going to desire each other. So we're not afraid of that. We're not choishish that there's going to be a mishkav zuchor. However, the ein rechts and shnei achim bekabul. In the city of Kabul, there was a minig that two brothers don't bathe together. We'll see soon why they made the minig. Okay, now, who are the sons of Rabbi and Gamliel? These are great people that they once traveled to Kabul. They're not from Kabul. They once traveled there. And they didn't know. They go bathe. There was a bathhouse. They went to bathe together. And the people were very offended by that. The entire city criticized them. I guess come over here, Frayakin. And they says, I can hear the voice. We never saw such a azapritzes. Now, what are we saying right now? That you can't be mevatlin in front of Kutayim. The people in Kabul were not Kutayim, they were from a people. We're saying that a minig that doesn't come from Talmidei Chachamim, you don't have to keep. So they could have just ignored them. But what did they do? The Nishmat Hillel said, now that he heard that there's a minig, both brothers did not have to leave because the problem is having both brothers together. One of them left. So Hillel Taka slipped out and he went L'beis HaChitzoim. And what would have been his alternative? He really could have told them, hey, 1 second, Kol HaKavod for your minig. Gesundheit hate. I don't have to keep your minig. And if they're not, now if they would have been Kutoyim, then you can't say it to them. Why? But you see, Hillel did not say that to them. Hillel heard the minig and he slipped out. He took the criticism and he slipped out. Another story, another minig. The din is the ikeradin that yoitzim bekur de kisoin. That's some sort of very wide type of shoe or slipper that the foot can slip out very easily. I think the name of it is slip-ons, a certain slipper that can fall off your foot easily. And ikeradin, you can walk on the street with this for Shabbos. What's the havamina? Why not? Because maybe your foot will slip out, maybe, and you're going to come to carry it. We don't have that chashash. However, a place took a minig achumra. The ein yoitzim bekur the kisoin b'Shabbos in the place called Birei. And again, Umaysev Yehuda v'Hillel, the sons of Rabbi and Gamliel, sheyotzu bekur the kisoin b'Shabbos b'Birei. They were there. They were walking with their slip-ons. And v'lo az olem Hamadina. And the people over there, the city, the townspeople, criticized them. And v'amnu miyomeinu lo re'inukach. So here also, they right away they adhered, they acquiesced. Ushmatum v'nasnum la'avdeim. They right away took their feet out of their shoes. There were avadim over there with it's late pasha. They did something in which they got rid of their shoes. There was no chilul Shabbos. And again, why did they not tell them, guys, you keep your minute. I don't have to keep your minute. The third case, that the Yoishem al Safsali Nachem b'Shabbos, there were certain stools in the public area that when people did salespeople would sit, the vendor would sit on that stool when he was engaged in selling his chayra. Then there were taka shops, but as we learned in Shabbos and in Eruvin, a lot of the commerce happened on the street, thus the shuk. Can I sit on such a stool on Shabbos? Why would I not be allowed to sit on such a stool? Because if normally vendors sit in that stool, in that benkele, when they're selling their wares, someone looking at me might think that I'm selling stuff on Shabbos. But we don't say that chashash. The din is that you are allowed to sit on Safsel Inachim Shabbos. However, in Akoy, there was a minig not to do that. But the Ein Yoshim al Safsel Inachim B'Shabbos in Akoy. And here we have the final story. Umaisa, we're going to go with the Besoidas Hashas, Berabban Gamliel himself. She Yashav al Safsel Inachim B'Shabbos Ba'akoy. And people saw him. And V'la'aza all of Kol HaMedina. Stam Lahoyer, that the word Kol is written over here. And in the second story, you don't have the Kol, you just have the Medina. In the first story, you have Vaiter Kol HaMedina. Stop. More people, everyone criticized. And Gamliel right away said, Oy Gavalt, Nishmat al Gabakarki, he slipped off the stool and he sat on the ground. And again, if Rab Chizda would not have limited the Braisa, then it makes sense. If you are in front of people that have a minig, don't be mavatal it, don't nullify it. But if we are limiting that only to kutayim, because if they'll see someone important not keeping the minig, they might become lax in all of their mitzvahs. L'chu'ura, these three cities were not like kutayim. So the Gemara answer is no. People there were frum, but these were three communities in which amongst them you didn't have a tzaddik, or you didn't have a chassidish yid. And therefore, there's also a fear in all of these three stories that the moment they would witness someone not upkeeping their minig, you don't have to be azoy fafrumt. That can lead for people becoming lax in the ikeradin. And therefore...
What about Mordechay? Does that apply?
No. Very good, Samach. So for them not to say anything, that would be a terrible thing. The way you circumvent the Mordechay is by saying, listen, me'ikeradin, what I'm doing is allowed. Okay, it's nice to know that you guys have a minig. I don't have to keep your minig. Then there's no Mordechay. Or if people from their Amaratzas think that the food that I have is not kosher, but I can't eat it because they don't know what all of these three things are mutter. Now the Gemara wants to know, why did they make these minhagim? So Bishlem is Safsalei Nachrim, as we explained, the reason why in Akoy they made that minhag is Meshum de Mechsek and Mekachomemka. This really goes back to the Tosfos that we learned. Why did you make a minhag? It's important to know where it came from. Now, if it came from a Yidat Tzaddik, there's nothing to know. You know already. But if it's coming from the people, so here it made sense, because that's where people used to sell their schayra. Bekur de Kisoy Nami, the reason why that place had a minhag not to wear these wide shoes or these loose-fitting shoes, because Dilma mishtalfen, because it might slip off, because it's loose. And va'asi la'ai suyinu arba amas b'reshus harabim, you might end up carrying it. Ella, the first Kabul, Ella reichten my tam and the loy. B'chal, there's a klal, we learned this in Kedushin, that Yisrael loy nechshetu al mishkav zechur. So what was the issue? So answers the Gemara Kedatanya. A person is allowed to bathe with anyone, chutz mi aviv. A person is not allowed to bathe, not with his father, nor with his father-in-law. Before we go on, Rashi says, listen to the words of Rashi, if a person will see his father ungarbed or his father-in-law, and he'll be remembered, that he came from there, or that his wife came from there. That thought is not kosher. It's a prasta thought. So to prevent that from happening, Ubal imoy, even if it's a stepfather, he has relations with my mother, or ubal achoisoi, or with one's brother-in-law. Rabbi Yehuda is matir ba'aviv, because there might be a downside, but there's more upside than downside, and that is when you go with your father to the bathhouse, your father has someone to help him, and go there mishum kavod aviv, and really kavod aviv even goes to a stepfather. Not on the same level, but we should honor the man who our father is married to, who our mother is married to, if she got remarried. Okay, that's the ikar. And now in Kabul, for Asu Ino, and they said, no one was mater balachoise. The holy heter was given to the father or to your stepfather, but to a brother-in-law, because of this hirur, he's having relations with my sister, you're not allowed to go. And to make sure you never bathe with balachoise, they were machmed, and they made a minig for two brothers not to bathe together. Okay, weiter. Tana, we learned on this theme that lo yirchatz im rabbi, however, the im rabbi tzarech loy muter. And here it's not about a psehirur. Here Rashi says it's pashit that there's a certain amount of reverence one needs to have for one's rebbe, and it's very difficult to have it if you see that person unclothed. Okay, weiter. This is mamish gavaldik amais over here now. But we're going to be learning about manhagim for a while. So listen to this. Before we go on, we learned this in Chulin. Many people love Chulin. Everyone should really love Chulin. You have a lot about chalev. Today we buy meat already in the market, and many people b'chlal are so machmir because of the lack of knowledge that they b'chlal never eat the hind part of the animal. But one of the areas in the animal where there is chalev is in the stomach, and there is a place in which the stomach is called a keshes because it's curved, and there's fat on the keshes. That is chalev. And then the stomach goes straight, and then there's fat on the straight part. That fat is called yeser. Yeser is mutter. Keshes is usher. Says the Gemara that Kiyoser Abba Bar Bar Chana, when he came, whenever the Gemara says Talmud Babli, that means what he lived in Eretz Yisrael, and he came to Bavel. And if Achal, the Ayisra, he ate yeser because me'ikar adin, the fat that's on the yeser, that's on the straight part of the stomach, is okay. But as we see over here clearly, that over here in Bavel, they were machmer. See already? Farther, when you really know, you do nikur. If you don't know, don't eat it. They don't eat any of it. But he was in his own house. What happened? Oily Gabe, who came to visit him, when he was eating something which me'ikar adin is mutter. In Eretz Yisrael, they ate it. In Bavel, they were machmed, they had a minig not to eat it. Oily Gabe, either Rav Avira Sava, or decided as Rav Avia. And Rabba Bereder Afuna. So two local chachamim from Bavel came to visit him, and Kevin, the chazinu, the moment he saw them enter, he did not want to eat it in front of them. So Kasya Minayu, he concealed it from them. Now, guys, what did we just learn now with Rab Chizda? That when there is a minig, if there's a minig that came from big chachamim, you have to keep to it. That's the Mishnah. Noisni olav chumrei makim shahalach, and chumra mimakim that he came to. If there's a minig that came from the people, I don't know how to be menaked. I don't want to get into it. I'm afraid I'm going to eat the keshes. I'm not eating any of it. So, Douglas, can I in front of them not keep their minig? So we learned if them are not chachamim, then I should keep it in front of them. But in front of chachamim, I can be mevatel it. He hid it. He didn't want them to see that he's eating something that they don't eat. Now they knew the din that yes, it is mutter, and they have a chumrah. So also now they noticed that he stopped eating it. So they shared that with Abaya, and Abaya found that to be insulting because Abaya told them the first white line, Shavinchu ki kutoim, that Rabbi Bar Bachana considers you like kutoim. In other words, had he honored our Chachmei Bavel more, he wouldn't have been afraid, so to say. It wouldn't have bothered him to eat it in front of us. But since he considers us to be like kutoim, the way Chachmei Eretz Yisrael look at everyone else, so therefore he didn't want to weaken your minig, so he hid it that he's eating it in front of you. But now we got a problem. Asks the Gemara, Rabbi Bar Chana, that we learned in our Mishnah, Noisnin, all of Chumri Hamakim Shiyatza Misham, V'Chumri Hamakim Shahalach L'Sham. And L'Cho'ira, clear, let's go with the Tosfos again, that the minig in Bavel not to eat yeser didn't come from the Amcha. It came from people that said, no, we're going to make a mistake. We're going to confuse one fat with the other. So L'Cho'ira, he should be bound by it. So listen to this. Another nuance. Amar Abaye, Hanamili, our Mishnah speaking about either when you travel from one place in Bavel to another place in Bavel, or from one place in Eretz Yisrael, guys, the third white line, to another place in Eretz Yisrael, or from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, In other words, the Machmirim are the Eretz Yisrael Nickers. Avol Eretz Yisrael Bavel. Aloi, that's the big exception. Why not? Why, if I come from Eretz Yisrael, why do I not need to keep a minig? Forget about in front of them to be mevatel. Why am I not bound when I'm with them with that minig? You know why? Because given the anan, kaifin, and lahu, since Chachmei Bavel are subordinate to Chachmei Eretz Yisrael, so therefore, Avdin and Kavosayu, we allow him. Avdin means Bnei Bavel are bound to the minig Bnei Bavel, but if you come from Eretz Yisrael, you don't have to Bechlal be Zich Mischashev with the minig that came from Bavel, because Bechlal, Bnei Bavel are subservient, they're subordinate to Bnei Eretz Yisrael. That's one approach. Mind you, this was said by Bnei Bavel. So it's Gavaldik. And Rabashi Yamar, Afilu Teim Eretz Yisrael Bavel. Even if you go, Hanamili, Heicha de Ein Data Lachsor, here we go. So since Ein Data Lachsor, that is where you say you have to keep the local custom, because now you came here to settle. But since Rabbi Bar Chana, he take went to Bavel temporarily, but Data Lachsor Have, not about being subordinate, so he need not adhere to the local minik. Again, the only thing is that not only that, be'emes, he should have been able to eat it in front of them. But he says, I don't want to weaken their minig. And Abaye took that as an insult. Weiter. Amalei Rabba Bar Bar Chana libnei. Bani or banai, if it's one or if it's two. Son or sons. Loi soichal. You guys should never eat this yeser. Not in front of me, and certainly shaloi b'fanai. Anayaz, another kanech. And he says like this: I Rabbi Bar Chana, that I saw Rabbi Yochanan eating it when I was in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yochanan was the head of the Eretz Yisrael. So since I saw him eating it, kedayu Rabbi Yochanan lismach olav, not only b'fanav, but even shaloi b'fanav. Now the pshat of b'fanav shaloi b'fanav is in front of him or not in front of him. The Meiri says b'fanav means during his lifetime and even after during his lifetime. But Ata, you, my sons, even though you're seeing your father eat, but you did not see Rabbi Yochanan eat. Ata, not Atem, so it's Bani. He had one son. Loira Isa Isai, since you never saw Rabbi Yochanan eating it, and therefore Loisai Chalbein Befanai, Bein Shalei Befanai. Amazing. No, it's Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, even though I'm relying on Rabbi Yochanan, he said to his son, I'm not a significant halachic authority for you to go against the local minik. So even with everything that we said, either Bnei Bavel are subordinate to Eretz Yisrael, either like Rabbi Ravashi says, even though they were planning to return, even with that, you can only be lenient and not keep the local minik, not keep the local chumrah, if you saw someone like Rabbi Yochanan not accepting the minik. Amazing. And the son of Rabbi that never had the schus to see Rabbi Yochanan, he was bound by the local minik. Even though he saw his father eating yeser, he was in it, and his father saw Rabbi Yochanan, not good enough. In other words, what's the power of looking at a Jew that looked at the Rebbe? So here it sounds like, no, only the one who saw has it, and the one who didn't see it himself doesn't have that koyach. It's not always correct. This next line, the second to last line, is not a kasha, it's a fact. That that Rabbi Bar Bar Chana once himself said something that is not aligned, and I'll explain at the end the way I would suggest why it's not a kasha. The Gemara doesn't answer it because it's not a kasha. It's just a statement that it doesn't always work that way. This concept: did you see Rabbi Yochanan or did you not see Rabbi Yochanan? So by Rabbi Yochanan, clearly he says whoever did not see Rabbi Yochanan eating yeser is bound by the local minik. Let's go to another story. That what happened?
Is this the whole concept of Messiah? Like where, in order to continue doing something, you have to speak like normally it's like edus of someone that did it, but this implies that it had to be someone chashav like Rabbi Yochanan.
Yeah, but very good, Danny. But here we're going against Messiah. No, here we're speaking about: am I allowed not to follow the local minik? And I can say I saw my Rebbe doing it in a different way. In a way that you guys find al pi minig not okay. I can do what my Rebbe did. I'm going against the local tradition. So here, if I saw the tzaddik doing it, I'm not bound by the locals. But even if I know that the tzaddik did it, but I didn't see it, then I have to keep the local minhag if they're machmirim. Amazing. Let's go back. Look into the next story.
Oh, wait, I remember when we learned the Chol Yisrael, Chol Avakim, those rules that today in America, if you're in a city where the overwhelming majority of the people only eat Chol Yisrael and your minhag is to eat Chol of Stam, you have to keep Chol Yisrael in those places. Like if you lived in Crown Heights,
that's exactly what we're learning over here. In other words, that we're limiting more and more. That was the kasha in the Gemara. How was Rabbi allowed not to keep the chumrah of Bavel? So you have to have he because he came from Eretz Yisrael, and you guys are only in Bavel because he's planning to go back to Eretz Yisrael, and because he saw Rabbi Yochanan, and you heard about it. It's not enough that you hear that Rabbi. You have to see Rabbi Yochanan. Let's go weiter. Now, this is the next case. Sachli, what he shared. We're going back a generation. So he's just sharing by a fabrengen what was told to him. The last line. Sachli Rabbi Yochanan ben Elazar. This is what I heard from Rabbi Elazar. Pamachas. There was a time that Nechnasti, that I, Rabbi Yochanan ben Elazar, I was going behind Rab Shimon ben Rabbi Yosi ben Lekunya Legina. I followed him, and he entered a garden. Daf Nun Aleph Amid Beis. And a few words of introduction. Bekitzer, Chevre, in the Holy Land, Shemitah is a year in which we may not work the land. We may not plant. We may not harvest like a balabas. We may not exercise anything that shows that we are the owners of the produce, but we are like anyone else. We can take a little bit of what is growing, and we can eat it as long as the pasuk says the words lebehemtecha v'lachaya asher ba'artzecha tiya kol tfuas alechol. So when can I take a little bit of food for me to eat or for my local domesticated animal to eat? Only when that is still out there, lachaya asher ba'artzecha. The moment we just mentioned these dinim, the moment whatever it is that I'm eating is no longer available out there, a chaya won't be able to find it. Even that which I have in my house, I no longer can keep. I have to do biur, peiros, shmita. And like we mentioned again, big machlokes Rambam and Tosfos and many other Rishonim. Rambam says biur means you have to push it, destroy it. And Tosfos and the others hold you have to just be mafkid it, and then you can take it back. Another intro. There's something called sfiche shvi'is. Mapshat sfiche. Sfiche means an aftergrowth. What's an aftergrowth? That there are times that we did not plant ourselves anything, but seeds from last year's harvest stayed on the ground, went into the ground, and by itself, without anyone doing purposefully the work, something grew out. It's of lesser quality. There's a lot less of it. We are of the Shita that something that grew on Shemitah, Sviche Shviz, is permissible like anything else, only up until the time that you have to do beer. Bishas beer ve'elach. So Svichem are like everything else, and you have to do beer. Okay, so what happened? Rashi says, guys, there's a huge machlokes. Look at this Gavaldik Tosfos who learns the whole Gemara min akotza lakotza different. We're going to learn Gemara Rashi Amachai. That's easier. Look inside. So what happened here is over here. Here we're speaking about he witnessed. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Elazar witnessed how the Tana Rabbi Shimon ben Rabbi Yosi ben Lekunya took cabbage that were svichim. But after the time that all other produce was not found on the field, this was the time that even if that which you already have in your house has to be burnt, has to be destroyed. From that time, you can't gather. But he took sviche kruv and he ate it. Not only did he eat it, but v'nasan li, he gave it to me to eat. And v'amar li, but when he gave it to me to eat, he says, listen, I know that there's a machlokes, tanoim, whether you can consume it or not. Only eat it in front of me. You can eat now the sviche of cabbage, but only because I'm present. Or according to the Meiri, only during my lifetime. And he explained himself. Since I saw Rab Shimon ben Yochai eating sviche kruv after Zman Habiur L'Rashi, so I can rely on him. And you see me, and I saw the tzaddik, so you can also rely on him. Kedayu Rab Shimon ben Yochai lismi chalav. I can eat befanav or shalei befanav because I saw him. Va'ata, but you did not see Rab Shimon bar Yochai, but you saw me. So va'ata befani yachol shlo befani lo yisayich. So before we go on, what do we see over here? That's the stira, or that's the difference between Rabbi Bar Chana's story and this second story that he shared. In the case of the Yesed, Rabbi Bar Chana did not tell his son, since I saw Rabbi Yechanan, so you can eat it befanai. He says, only I can eat, but you cannot eat. But if the origin was not Rabbi Yechanan, if the origin was the Rashbi, so we have to be careful, but we have tzaddikim, we have like Hasidus tzaddikim gedolim. If someone saw the Rashbi, then their koyach is not only that they can be noyeg, like the Rashbi did, but anyone that sees them can also be noyeg. Beautiful. In other words, the koyach of the tzaddik goes further, not only to those who saw the tzaddik, but to those who see people who saw the tzaddik. How great is that? And now the Gemara is going to tell you, where do we have this machlokes between Rab Shimon bar Yochai and the others regarding can you eat aftergrowth of cabbage after the Zman HaBiyur or not? Why yeah, why not? Where does this come from? So my Rab Shimon, the Tanya, Rab Shimon Omer, kol ha-svichim asurim. Again, Lirashi, svichim, like anything else. If this product is no longer found, ulachaya asher ba'artzecha, then you can't eat it yourself. And if you already have it in your house, you have to be mevayed it. L'Rambam l'toisvus. Chutz mi-svichei kruv. Svichei kruv is different. In other words, she'ein kayoytze bahem b'yerek hasod. There is nothing like the aftergrowth of kruv, like Rashi explains, that when you put cabbage in the ground, it doesn't disintegrate. So it never is not available, even during the winter. Unlike everything else, that there is a time that indeed it's not available to the chayas. Cabbage is always available. There's always something in the ground. So by the letter of the law, Taka, since cabbage is always available to the chayas, everyone is moida by the letter of the law that I should be allowed to eat it because that's the rule that the God gave. However, so it says, so Rab Shimon says that we follow the Ikar Adin. Svichei kruv can be eaten. She'en kayid v'erek hasoda. The Chachamim oimrim, and that's a chumrah. No, kol ha-svicha masurim. Again, Rashi, that once nothing else is available in the fields, we don't differentiate between cabbage and everything else, even though begashmi is their taka different. And even though begashmi is, some part of the cabbage is still on the ground. And the Tarvayu, both Rab Shimon and the Chachamim, they are following the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. B'chlal, let's go to Svichim. The Tanya we learned in the Braisa. This is Shita Rabbi Akiva. It says in Parshas Bahal, that people, we're going to tell Hashem, how will we have food to eat after the Shemitah, right? This is the kasha. Hey, loy nizra, not that we sowed, not that we planted, v'loy nesav tvoseinu, nor did we harvest. So how are we going to have what to eat? And God gives us the bracha, that the mitzivisi is berchasi, right? B'shnas hashishi. So Amar Rabbi Akiva had a gavaldik kasha. That b'chimiacha she'ein zoyrin, why does the Torah have to say that that Moshe Rabbeinu was telling us that we might ask, if we didn't plant and we didn't harvest, how are we going to have what to eat? The word we did not harvest is superfluous, because if you don't plant, of course you have nothing to harvest. The Torah should just say that we're going to ask, if we don't plant, how are we going to have what to eat? Since we're not allowed to plant, so of course we won't harvest. So mikan. So from here, learned Rabbi Akiva that svichim, even that which you did not plant, whatever grows by itself after growth, svichim, they are bound to the same rules of that which you did plant. And what is that? First of all, you can never harvest it like the balabas. But even the little bit that you can take, you can only take until the Zman HaBiyur. After the Zman HaBiyur, learns Rashi, that's this Braisa, Svichim, after the Zman HaBiyur are Asurim. With the one exception, according to Rab Shimon, that since Svichei Kruv, they are always available. They are always available. So the question is, why would the Chachamim be machman? And Michael Mifligi, if they both subscribe to the sheet of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbanan Savri, it's a Gezerah. Gozrin and Svichei Kruv, Ato Shvar Svichei de Alma. Rab Shimon Savri, Loi Gozrin and Svichei Kruv, Ato Svichei de Alma. But why do we have the Kitzur coming back to our Minhagim, that if someone who saw Rabbi Yechanan or saw the Rashbi following a lenient approach, even if they moved to a place where people in their new location is machmir, now you have to go through again, there's no time, maybe only from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, maybe only if Datei Lachzer. You're not necessarily bound because you saw the tzaddik. But someone who sees you, so then it depends. When it came to him and Rabbi Yechanan, he didn't pass it on. But Rabbi himself knows, he was the one that shared it, that if it started with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, then someone who saw Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai has the power to pass on that leniency. Moedik. The schus that we have, even for people that did not physically see the Rebbe, just to be aware of that Tavshan Pei Aleph, that you see, you can look at a Yid that saw the Rebbe. And there's a big koyach in that. Okay, now we're going to go back to the Mishnah, and the Mishnah, Mamash is a stira. The Mishnah, again, speaking about a traveler, the Mishnah said two statements, like two rules, and they could sometimes contradict each other. Right? The Mishnah says that if you go from one place to a new place, keep the chumrah. Then the Mishnah says, rule number 2, don't deviate from the local custom. The Mishnah says, don't create machloikas, which means don't deviate from the local custom. Right? Sometimes they work in harmony, sometimes they contradict each other. So Vichule says the Gemara, the Mishnah is speaking about the minig that some communities had not to work on Erev Pesach until Chatzos. From Chatzos until Pesach is asur in working your own, working your business, me'ikar adin. Boom. Do we begin that from the morning? Depends on the minig. So if a person traveled from a place that people are oisen, and they come to a place where people are machmir, l'makim she'ein oisen, and on that the Mishnah says, noisen olav chumri makim shalach l'sham, which would mean that you are not allowed to work. And then the Mishnah gives the other criterion, the other rule, va'al yishane adam, don't change from the local custom, mipnei ha'machloikes, and therefore v'loi li'avid. So you have two reasons why you should not work. Number 1 is the minig hamakim is not to work. Number 2 is if you're going to work in public, then you're going to be deviating, you're going to create our machloikes. Like we had in Amud Aleph, that the Ganze Medina is going to start criticizing you. Elo, but how what's going to happen if you are coming mimakaim she'ein oisim? If you come from a place where people were machmir, and you now arrived in a place that's oisim, people here are lenient. All right? So what are you saying? That being machmir means that you should also not work. But if you're not going to work, then how will that fit with the next statement? Va'al yishana adam apnei machloikes v'navid. You can't keep both of these rules. Sometimes they will go against each other. And when they go against each other, which one will trump? Says the Gemara, Amar Abaye, indeed. The second rule is the more important one. Al yishana adam apnei machloikes. And indeed, when did the Mishnah say nois and olav? Chumra, that's only Aresha. It's when you come from a place that works. You arrive in a place that is machmer, that doesn't work. That in itself is a reason for you to keep the local minig, because you should be machmer. Take the more chamur. On top of the most important is, don't do something that will create machloikis. Al yeshane adam epnei machloikis. But if you have to pick and choose between one and the other, says Abaye, then the al yeshana adam epnei machloikis will trump being machmir. Be lenient and don't create a machloikis. So therefore the al yeshana adam, the first din of the Mishnah of chumra is only aresha.
How's that chumra?
No. I think I got it wrong. Look inside the Rashi. The second to last narrow line in Rashi. That Abaye says it only goes on the Reisha. That Va'al Yeshana, that not changing, not to create a machlokes, is only going a Reisha. Only a Reisha koi. Ha'hoylech lemakam she'oisim lemakam she'ein oisim. So then you won't be doing a machlokes because you're going to be machmer. I take it back. The opposite. Abaye says you always have to be machmer. The Mishnah says also don't create a machlokes. Yeah, even better in the case where you're not going to create a machlokes. I think that's shot over here.
Because there's no action. There's no action in
Jonathan, that's what the Rav is going to say. That's what the Rav is going to say. Yeah, I think Abaye is saying that if you're coming to a place where people work, then work. Yeah, the first thing I said was correct. Abaye, I did make sure I'm saying correct over here. Abaye is saying that don't be Mishana. Don't be Mishana is the Iker. Even better when you can keep that which is Chamur. Even better when you can keep that. But if you can't keep that which is Chamur, then don't create a Machloikis. Which means go work. Rava says no, lo ilam ha-seifa. And you're not going to create a, you can be machmer, and you're not going to create a machlokes. Why? Even if you're going to be machmer, that means you are in a place where people work, and you will not work. You will be machmer. You're going to make them not being machmer the iker. It's not going to create a machlokes, because why would it make a machlokes? Why do you think Micah Amra Toroyim? Micah Amra, what are you going to tell me that Horoya Omer Malach Asura? This guy thinks that you're not allowed to work, right? No, it's everyone is working. You're going to be machmer, you're not going to work. So people are going to say, ooh, you're machmer. They're not going to say that. Maybe no, people are going to say, Kama batlon hava bashuka. Yeah, no, how lay the geir. It's not working. When someone doesn't work, it doesn't show that he holds that you're not allowed to work. Not working he's a batlon. Or bachlal, when it comes to guests, when people come and people are coming, not everyone is employed. It's very normal for a newcomer not to have work. So always be machmed. That's the way Rabbi learns. Always be machmed and never make a machloikis. And even if you are in a place that people work on out of Pesach and you will always be machmed because it came min makoim, that will not create a machloikis. According to Abaye, I'm learning good. According to Abaye argues and he says that if you come to a place where people work. The latter statement in the Mishnah trumps. The machloikis is the most important. Keeping all the chumras should only be done when it's not going to create a machlokes. Machlokes abayino. Very good.
No, I don't think Rabbi is saying that you should ever work. It's only on the ratio, meaning if you're going to a place where they don't work and you come from a place where you do work, you're not allowed to work. That's where
Correct.
It applies. Yeah, but he's not saying that if you go to a place where they do work that you should work. No.
How is Rabbi arguing with Abaye?
I don't.
So how is Rabbi arguing with
He's just interpreting that you could explain those words that you
no, Danny. Rabbi Omar lo oilamas. Because Abaye holds that in the case of the Seifa, what should you do? Al Yeshana. Mepnei Machlokes. I'm learning good. Okay, let's go back. Now, one final case. Listen to this, my friends. That we, Mirab Safra and Yurababo, the Yadinen Bikviya the Yarcha, explains the Toisvis in the bottom. Listen to the scenario here. They lived in locations. In the beginning, they had the system of notifying really everyone when is Rosh Chodesh. But came the Tzedukim and they messed up. Very good. And they messed up the system. So now it began with Shluchim. Shluchim have to physically travel. So they needed to get to locations. I want to go to the way Rabbi Kiva Eger explains in the Toisvis the Pshat over here. And that is like this. They lived in a location that by Pesach, the Shluchim always arrived. They always knew when Pesach is. Because you have from Rosh Chodesh, you have until Pesach. On Tishrei, they never knew when Sukkot is. Why did they not know when Sukkot is? Because Shluchim, aside of not being allowed to travel on Shabbos, in Tishrei you have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. You have more days in which Shluchim cannot travel. So there were certain locations that they found out Nisan when Rosh Chodesh was before Yom Tov, before Pesach, and by Sukkot they had to keep 2 days Sukkot. Some of those areas made a chumrah upon themselves not to differentiate between Pesach and Sukkot, since by Sukkot we have to keep 2 days, so they were machmed, and they're going to keep 2 days of Pesach as well. Nearby areas, which is where Rab Safra and Abba came from, they didn't take upon themselves that chumrah. Taka by Sukkot they kept 2 days, but for Pesach, since the shluchim came, they would only keep 1 day. So this is the case. So what happens was they came from a place where they kept 1 day Pesach, and now they traveled punkt now together to a location where they're keeping 2 days Pesach. Look on top of Nun Beis. And now what is their question? Do we have to keep the local minig of 2 days? Or Or can we only keep 1 day? So he said like this, Ba Yishuv, when we are in the community, then lo yavidna, then we should not break Yom Tiv. Look inside the Rashi, this is fundamental. Rashi says, Li Einehem, that Beferesia, don't behave like it is a non-Yom Tov day, even though it really is. Says Rashi, Li Einehem lo yavidna. Look inside the top Tosfos. No, if you live in the community, even Bitsina, and even in Dati Lachser, still, if here people are noyek 2 days Yom Tiv, you have to keep 2 days Yom Tiv. Huge machlokas Rashi and Tosfos. Mipnei, why is that? This is the top line. This is following both Abaye and Rava, that what is most important is not to make a shinoi that will cause a machlokas. But asks Rab Safra to Rab Abba, Bamidbar Mai. Romans, if we go to the location, but we're not living in the community, we're a little bit out there. We're outside the Eruv. We're south of the 10. No one there is going to see us. So do we still have to keep the local, or can we go back to our minhag of keeping only 1 day, especially since Dati Lachser? So Amalei, Hachi Amarav Ami, only by Yishuv Aser. And indeed, by Mitmar Mutar. But remember, at least we're not learning halacha, but at least this is the source. That's the Rashi and the Tosfos. When you are B'Yishuv, even Dati Lachser, can you keep Choil or Cholamoyed, Betsina or not? Rashi says, Betsina, you can do whatever you want. Tosfos says, no, even Betsina you may not do, God willing to be continued. This is it, guys.
Rabbi.
Books are written on this. I learned good pshat on Abaye, Danny.
I don't think so. Rabbi, here's what I understood, that Abaye is saying you have to always be machmir, right? And Rava's arguing, he's saying he agrees, okay, you're only machmir. He says you could even apply it to the seifa, where in this case, if you worked, you would be makel, right? So, but he says, by you not working, no one's going to get upset at you, which implies from Rava, if there was some situation where they taka would get upset at you, you actually have to work. That's the machlokes Rav and Abaye. Meaning Abaye holds you have to work.
Abaye holds you have to work.
No, Abaye says you're not allowed to work. He says you only follow, like at the ratio, you only follow.
Rashi, no, Danny, Rashi doesn't say that. Read the Rashi. Rashi says clearly otherwise. Abaye holds that when you come l'makim sha'oisen, you have to do malach. You have to do malach. Clearly.
All right, that's not what I read here. All right.
Okay, Chadra, to be continued.